Chapter 13 of Gray Lensman by E. Smith. Chapter 13. The Gray Lensman went back to his mining with a will and with unimpaired vigor, for his distress aboard the ship he had rescued had been the sheerest acting. One small bottle of good brandy was scarcely a cocktail to the physique that had stood up under quart after quart of the crudest, wickedest, fieriest beverage known to space. That tiny morsel of Bentlem, scarcely half a unit, affected him no more than a lozenge of licorice. 3 weeks, 21 days each of 24 GP hours. At the end of that time, he had learned from the mind of the Zwilnik that the Boskonian director of the Borovan solar system, would visit Miner's Rest to attend some kind of a meeting. His informant did not know what the meeting was to be about, and he was not unduly curious about it. Kinnison, however, did and was. The lensman knew, or at least very shrewdly suspected, that meeting was to be a regional conference of the big-shot Zwilniks. He was intensely curious to know all about everything that was to take place, and he was determined to be present. 3 weeks was a lot of time. In fact, he should be able to complete his quota of heavy metal in 2 or less. It was there. There was no question of that. Right out there were the meteors, unaccountable thousands of millions of them, and a certain proportion of them carried values. The more and the harder he worked, the more of these worthwhile wanderers of the void he would find. Therefore, he labored long, hard, and rapidly, and his store of high-test meteors grew apace. To such good purpose did he use beam and Spaulding drill that he was ready more than a week ahead of time. That was QX. He'd much rather be early than late. Something might be happening to hold him up. Things did happen too often, and he had to be at that meeting. Thus it came about that a few days before the all-important date, Kinnison's battered treasure hunter blasted herself down to her second landing at Strongheart's dock. This time the miner was welcomed, not as a stranger, but as a friend of long standing. "Hi, Wild Bill," Strongheart yelled at the sight of the big space hound. "Right on time, I see. Glad to see you. Luck, too, I hope. Lots of luck, and all good, I bet me, ain't it?" "Ho, Strongheart," the lensman roared in return, pommeling the dive-keeper affectionately. "Had a good trip, yeah, a fine trip. Struck a rich sector, twice as much as I got last time. Told you I'd be back in 5 or 6 weeks, and made it in 5 weeks and 4 days. Keeping tab on the days, huh? I'll say I do. With a thirst like mine, a guy can't do nothing else. I tell you, all my guts are drier than any desert on the whole of Mars. Well, what are we waiting for? Check this plunder of mine in and let me get to going places and doing things." The business end of the visit was settled with neatness and dispatch. Dealer and miner understood each other thoroughly. Each knew what could and what could not be done to the other. The meteors were tested and weighed. Supplies for the ensuing trip were bought. The guarantee and 24 units of Benny, QX. No argument, no hysterics, no bickering or quarreling or swearing. Everything on the green all the way. Gentlemen and friends. Kinnison turned over his keys, accepted a thick sheaf of currency, and, after the first formal drink with his host, set out upon the self-imposed superstitious tour of the other hot spots which would bring him favor, or at least would avert the active disfavor, of Clono, his spaceman's deity. This time, however, that tour took longer. Upon his first ceremonial round, he had entered each saloon in turn, had bought 1 drink of whatever was nearest, had tossed it down, and had gone on to the next place, unobserved and inconspicuous. How different it all was! Wherever he went, he was the center of attention. Men who had met him before flung themselves upon him with whoops of welcome. Men who had never seen him clamored to drink with him. Women, whether or not they knew him, fawned upon him and brought into play their every lure and wile. For not only was this man a hero and a celebrity of sorts, he was a lucky or a skillful miner, whose every trip resulted in wads of money big enough to clog the underjets of a Valerian freighter. Moreover, when he was lit up, he threw it around regardless, and he was getting stewed as fast as he could swallow. Let's keep him here, or if we can't do that, let's go along wherever he goes. This, too, was strictly according to the lensman's expectations. Everybody knew that he did not do any serious drinking glass by glass at the bar, but bottle by bottle; that he did not buy individual drinks for his friends, but let them drink as deeply as they would from whatever container chanced then to be in hand, and his vast popularity gave him a sound excuse to begin his bottle buying at the start instead of waiting until he got back to Strongheart's. He bought then several or many bottles and tins in each place instead of a single drink. And since everybody knew for a fact that he was a practically bottomless drinker, who was even to suspect that he barely moistened his gullet, while the hangers-on were really emptying the bottles, flasks, and flagons? And during his real celebration at Strongheart's, while he drank enough, he did not drink too much. He waxed exceedingly happy and frolicsome as before. He was as profligate, as extravagant in tips. He had the same sudden flashes of hot anger. He fought enthusiastically and awkwardly as Wild Bill Williams did, although only once or twice that time. And he did not have to draw his delameters at all. He was so well known and so beloved. He sang as loudly and as raucously and with the same good taste in madrigals. Therefore, when the infiltration of thought-screened men warned him that the meeting was about to be called, Kinnison was ready. He was in fact cold sober when he began his tuneful last 2-bottle trip up the street, and he was almost as sober when he returned to base, empty of bottles and pockets, to make the usual attempt to obtain more money from Strongheart, and to compromise by taking his farewell chew of Bentlem instead. Nor was he unduly put out by the fact that both Strongheart and the Zwilnik were now wearing screens. He had taken it for granted that they might be, and had planned accordingly. He seized the packet as avidly as before, chewed its contents as ecstatically, and slumped down as helplessly and as idiotically. That much of the show, at least, was real. 24 units of that drug will paralyze any human body, make it assume the unmistakable pose and stupefied mien of the Bedlam eater. But Kinnison's mind was not an ordinary one. The dose, which would have rendered any bona fide miner's brain as helpless as his body, did not affect the lensman's new equipment at all. Alcohol and Bentlem together were bad, but the lensman was sober. Therefore, if anything, the drugging of his body only made it easier to dissociate his new mind from it. Furthermore, he need not waste any thought in making it act. There was only one way it could act now, and Kinnison let his new senses roam abroad, without even thinking of the body he was leaving behind him. In view of the rigorous orders from higher up, the conference room was heavily guarded by screened men. No one except old and trusted employees were allowed to enter it, and they were also protected. Nevertheless, Kinnison got in by proxy. A clever pickpocket brushed against a screened waiter who was about to enter the sacred precincts. Lightning fingers flicked a switch. The waiter began to protest, then forgot what he was going to say, even as the pickpocket forgot completely the deed he had just done. The waiter, in turn, was a trifle clumsy in serving a certain big shot, but earned no rebuke thereby, for the latter forgot the offense almost instantly. Under Kinnison's control, the director fumbled at his screen generator for a moment, loosening slightly a small but important resistor. That done, the lensman withdrew delicately, and the meeting was an open book. "Before we do anything," the director began, "show me that all your screens are on." He bared his own. It would have taken an expert serviceman an hour to find that it was not functioning perfectly. "Poppycock!" snorted the Zwilnik. "Who in all hells of space thinks that a lensman would or could come to Euphrosyne? No one can tell what this particular lensman can or can't do, and nobody knows what he is doing until just before he dies. Hence the strictness. You've searched everybody here, of course?" "Everybody," Strongheart averred. even the drunks and dopes. The whole building is screened, besides the screens we're wearing. The dopes don't count, of course, provided they're really doped. No one except the Gray Lensman himself could possibly conceive of a lensman being, not seeming to be, but actually being, a drunken sot, to say nothing of being a confirmed addict of any drug. By the way, who is this Wild Bill Williams that I've been hearing about? Strongheart and his friend looked at each other and laughed. I checked up on him early, the Zwilnik chuckled. He isn't the lensman, of course, but I thought at first he might be an agent. We frisked him and his ship thoroughly, no dice, and checked back on him as a miner 4 solar systems back. He's clean, anyway. This is his second bender here. He's been guzzling everything in stock for a week, getting more pie-eyed every day, and Strongheart and I just put him to bed with 24 units of Benny. You know what that means, don't you? Your own Benny or his? The director asked. My own. That's why I know he's clean. All the other dopes are too. The drunks we gave the bomb's rush like you told us to. UX, I don't think there's any danger myself. I think that the hot-shot lensman they're afraid of is still working Brunseka. But these orders, not to take any chances at all, come from way, way up. How about this new system they're working on, that nobody knows his boss anymore? Asked the Zwilnik. Hooey, I call it. Not ready yet, the director answered. They haven't been able to invent one that is safe enough for them and yet will handle the volume of work that has to be done. In the meantime, we're using these books. Cumbersome, but absolutely safe, they say, unless and until the enemy gets onto the idea. Then one group will go into the lethal chambers of the patrol, and the rest of us will use something else. Some say that this code can't be cracked without the key. Others say any code can be read in time. Anyway, here's your orders. Pass them along. Give me your stuff, and we'll have supper and a few drinks. They ate. They drank. They enjoyed an evening and a night of high revelry and low dissipation, each to his taste, each secure in the knowledge that his thought screen was 100% effective against the one enemy he really feared. Indeed, the screens were that effective, then. The lensman, having learned from the director all that he knew, had restored the generator to full efficiency in the instant of his relinquishment of control. Although the heads of the Zwilniks, and therefore their minds, were secure against Kinnison's prying, the books of record were not. And though his body was lying helplessly inert upon a drug fiend's cot, his sense of perception read those books, if not as readily as though they were in his hands and open, yet readily enough. And, far off in space, a power-brained lensman yclept Warsaw recorded upon imperishable metal a detailed account, including names, dates, facts, and figures, of all the doings of all the Zwilniks of a solar system. The information was coded, it is true, but since Kinnison knew the key, it might just as well have been printed in English. To the later consternation of narcotics, however, that tape was sent in under Lensman's seal. The spool could not be opened until the Gray Lensman gave the word. In 24 hours, Kinnison recovered from the effects of his debauch. He got his keys from Strongheart. He left the asteroid. He knew the mighty intellect with whom he had next to deal. He knew where that entity was to be found, but, sad to say, he had positively no idea at all as to what he was going to do or how he was going to do it. Wherefore, it was that a sense of relief tempered, with no small degree, the natural apprehension he felt upon receiving an insistent call from Port Admiral Haines. Truly, this must be something really extraordinary, for while during the long months of his service Kinnison had called the Chief of Staff scores of times, Haines had never before lensed him. "Kinnison, Haines calling," the message beat into his consciousness. Kinnison acknowledging Haines, sir, the Gray Lensman thought back. "Am I interrupting anything important?" "No, sir, not at all. I'm just doing a little flit. A situation has come up which we feel you should study, not only in person, but also without advance information or preconceived ideas. Is it at all possible for you to come into Prime Base immediately? Yes, sir. Eminently so. In fact, a little time right now might do me good in two ways. Let me mull a job over, and let a nut mellow down to a point where maybe I can crack it. At your orders, sir. Not orders, Kinnison, the old man reprimanded him sharply. No one gives unattached lensmen orders. We request or suggest, but you are the sole judge as to where your greatest usefulness lies. Please believe, sir, that your requests are orders to me, Kinnison replied in all seriousness. Then, more lightly, your calling me in suggests an emergency, and traveling in this minor scow of mine is just a trifle faster than going afoot. How about sending out something with more legs to pick me up? The Dauntless, for instance? Oh, you've got her rebuilt already? Yes. I'll bet she's a sweet clipper. She was a mighty slick stepper before. Now she must have more legs than a centipede. And so it came about that in a region of space entirely empty of all other vessels, as far as ultra-powerful detectors could reach, the Dauntless met Kinnison's tugboat. The two went inert and maneuvered briefly. Then the immense warship engulfed her tiny companion and flashed away. "Hi, Kim, you old son of a space flea!" A general yell arose at sight of him, and irresistible youth rioted, regardless of regs, in this reunion of old comrades in arms who were yet scarcely more than boys in years. "His nib says for you to call him, Kim, when we're about an hour out from Prime Base," Commander Maitland informed his classmate irreverently, as the Dauntless neared the Solarian system. "Plate or lens?" "Didn't say. As you like, I suppose." "Plate, then, I guess. Don't want to butt in." In a few minutes, Chief of Staff and Gray Lensman were in image face to face. "How are you making out, Kinnison?" The port admiral studied the young man's face intently, gravely, line by line. Then, upon his lens, "We heard about the shows you put on clear over here on Tellus. A man can't drink and dope the way you did without suffering consequences. I've been wondering if even you can fight it off. How about it? How do you feel now?" "Some craving, of course," Kinnison replied, shrugging his shoulders. "That can't be helped. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. However, I can assure you as a fact that it's nothing I can't lick. I've got it pretty well boiled out of my system already." "Mighty glad to hear that, son. Only Ellison and I know who Wild Bill Williams really is. You had us scared stiff for a while." Then, speaking aloud, "I would like to have you come to my office as soon as is convenient after you land." "I'll be there, Chief, 2 minutes after we hit the bumpers." And he was. "Right of way, Norma?" he asked, waving an airy salute at the attractive young woman in Haynes's outer office. "Go right in, Lensman Kinnison. He's waiting for you." And opening the door for him, she stood aside as he strode into the sanctum. The port admiral returned the younger man's punctilious salute. Then the two shook hands warmly before Haynes referred to the third man in the room. "Navigator Zilipic, this is Lensman Kinnison, unattached. Sit down, please. This may take some time. Now, Kinnison, I want to tell you that ships have been disappearing right and left, disappearing without sending out an alarm or leaving a trace. Convoying makes no difference, as the escorts also disappear. Any with the new projectors?" Kinnison flashed the question via lens. This was nothing to talk about aloud. "No," came the reassuring thought in reply. "Everyone bottled up tight until we find out what it's all about. Sending out the Dauntless after you was the only exception." "Fine. You shouldn't have taken even that much chance." This interplay of thought took but an instant. Haynes went on with scarcely a break in his voice. "With no more warning or report than the freighters and liners they are supposed to be protecting. Automatic reporting also fails. The instruments simply stop sending. The first and only sign of light, if it is such a sign, which frankly I doubt, came shortly before I called you in, when Zilipic here came to me with his tall story." Kinnison looked then at the stranger. Pink, unmistakably a Chicladorian, pink all over. Bushy hair, triangular eyes, teeth, skin, all that peculiar color. Not the flush of red blood showing through translucent skin, but opaque pigment. the brick reddish pink so characteristic of the near humanity of that planet. "We have investigated this Zillipic thoroughly," Haynes went on, discussing the Chicladorian as impersonally as though he were upon his home planet instead of there in the room listening. "The worst of it is that the man is absolutely honest, or at least he himself believes that he is, in telling this yarn. Also, except for this one thing, this obsession, fixed idea, hallucination, call it what you like, it seems incredible that it can be a fact. He not only seems to be, but actually is absolutely sane. Now, Zillipic, tell Kinnison what you have told the rest of us. And Kinnison, I hope that you can make sense of it. None of the rest of us can." "QX, go ahead. I'm listening." But Kinnison did far more than listen. As the fellow began to talk, the Gray Lensman insinuated his mind into that of the Chicladorian. He groped for moments, seeking the wavelength. Then he, Kimball Kinnison, was actually reliving with the pink man an experience which harrowed his very soul. The second navigator of a Radoligian vessel died in space, and when it landed on Chicladoria, I took the berth. About a week out, the whole crew went mad all at once. The first I knew of it was when the pilot on duty beside me left his board, picked up a stool, and smashed the automatic recorder. Then he went inert and neutralized all the controls. I yelled at him, but he didn't answer me, and all the men in the control room acted funny. They just milled around like men in a trance. I buzzed the captain, but he didn't acknowledge either. Then the men around me left the control room and went down the companionway toward the main lock. I was scared. My skin prickled and the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. But I followed along, quite a ways behind, to see what they were going to do. The captain, all the rest of the officers, and the whole crew joined them in the lock. Everybody was acting kind of crazy, as if they were in an awful hurry to get somewhere. I didn't go any nearer. I wasn't going to go out into space without a suit on. I went back into the control room to get a spy ray, then changed my mind. That was the first place they would come to if they boarded us, as they probably would. Other ships had disappeared in space, plenty of them. Instead, I went over to a lifeboat and used its spy. And I tell you, sirs, there was nothing there. Nothing at all. The stranger's voice rose almost to a shriek. His mind quivered in an ecstasy of horror. "Steady, Xlipic, steady," the Gray Lensman said quietingly. "Everything you've said so far makes sense. It all fits right into the matrix. Nothing to go off the beam about it all." "What? You believe me?" The Chicladorian stared at Kinnison in amazement, an emotion very evidently shared by the port admiral. "Yes," the man in gray leather asserted. "Not only that, but I have a very fair idea of what's coming next. G.A." The men walked out into space. The pink man offered this information diffidently, although positively, an oft-repeated but starkly incredible statement. "They did not float outwards, sir. They walked, and they acted as if they were breathing air, not space. And as they walked, they sort of faded out, became thin, misty-like. This sounds crazy, sir," to Kinnison alone. "I thought then maybe I was cuckoo, and everybody around here thinks I am now, too. I don't know." "I do. You aren't," Kinnison said calmly. "Well, and here comes the worst of it. They walked around just as though they were in a ship, growing fainter all the time. Then some of them lay down and something began to skin one of them. Skin him alive, sir, but there was nothing there at all. I ran then. I got into the fastest lifeboat on the far side and gave her all the oof she'd take. That's all, sir." "Not quite, Xliptic, unless I'm badly mistaken. Why didn't you tell the rest of it while you were at it?" "I didn't dare to, sir. If I'd told any more, they would have known I was crazy instead of just thinking so." He broke sharply, his voice altering strangely as he went on. "What makes you think there was anything more, sir? Do you—" The question trailed off into silence. "I do. If what I think happened really did happen, there was more, quite a lot more, and worse, wasn't there?" "I'll say there was!" The navigator almost exploded in relief. "Or rather, I think now that there was, but I can't describe any of it very well. Everything was getting fainter all the time, and I thought that I must be imagining most of it." "You weren't imagining a thing," the lensman began, only to be interrupted by Haines. "Hell's jingling bells!" that worthy almost shouted. "If you know what it was, tell me." "Think I know, but not quite sure yet. Got to check it." Can't get it from him. He's told everything he really knows. He didn't really see anything. It was practically invisible. Even if he had tried to describe the whole performance, you wouldn't have recognized it. Nobody could have, except Worcel and I, and possibly Van Buskirk. I'll tell you the rest of what actually happened, and Exclippic can tell us if it checks. His features grew taut. His voice became hard and chill. "I saw it done once. Worse, I heard it. Saw it and heard it, clear and plain. Also, I knew what it was all about, so I can describe it a lot better than Exclippic possibly can. Every man of that crew was killed by torture. Some were flayed alive, as Exclippic said. Then they were carved up, slowly and piecemeal. Some were stretched, pulled apart by chains and hooks on racks. Some twisted on frames, boiled little by little, picked apart bit by bit, gassed, eaten away by corrosives one molecule at a time, pressed out flat as though between two plates of glass, whipped, scourged, beaten gradually to a pulp. Other methods, lots of them, indescribable. All slow, though, and extremely painful. Greenish-yellow light showing the aura of each man as he died. Beams from somewhere, possibly invisible, consuming the auras. Check, Exclippic." "Yes, sir, it checks," the Chicladorian exclaimed in profound relief, then added carefully, "that's the way the torture was. Exactly, sir. But there was something funny, a difference about their fading away. I can't describe what was funny about it, but it didn't seem so much that they became invisible as that they went away, sir, even though they didn't go anyplace. That's due to the way that system of invisibility works. Got to be, nothing else will fit into—" "The overlords of Delgon," Haines rasped sharply. "But if that's a true picture, how in all the hells of space did this Exclippic, alone of all the ship's personnel, get away clean? Tell me that." "Simple," the Gray Lensman snapped back as sharply. "The rest were all Radagalians. He was the only Chicladorian aboard. The overlords simply didn't know that he was there. They didn't feel him at all. Chicladorians think on a wave nobody else in the galaxy uses. You must have noticed that when you felt of him with your lens. It took me half a minute to synchronize with him. As for his escape, that makes sense too. The overlords are slow workers, and when they're playing that game, they really concentrate on it. They don't pay any attention to anything else. By the time they got done and were ready to take over the ship, he could be almost anywhere." "But he says that there was no ship there, nothing at all," Haines protested. "Invisibility isn't hard to understand," Kinnison countered. "We've almost got it ourselves. We undoubtedly could have it as good as that with a little more work on it. There was a ship there, beyond question. Close, hooked on with magnets and with a space tube, lock to lock. The only peculiar part of it, and the bad part, is something you haven't mentioned yet. What would the overlords, if, as we must assume, some of them got away from Worcel and his crew, be doing with the ship? They never had any spaceships that I ever knew anything about, nor any other mechanical devices requiring any advanced engineering skill. Also, and most important, they never did and never could invent or develop such an invisibility apparatus as that." Kinnison fell silent, and while he frowned in thought, Haines dismissed the Chicladorian with orders that his every want be supplied. "What do you deduce from those facts?" the port admiral presently asked. "Plenty," the Gray Lensman said darkly. I smell a rat. In fact, it stinks to high heaven. Boskone. You may be right, the Chief of Staff conceded. It was hopeless, he knew, for him to try to keep up with this man's mental processes. But why, and above all, how? Why is easy. They both owe us a lot and want to pay us in full. Both hate us all to pieces. How is immaterial. One found the other some way. They're together, just as sure as hell's a man-trap, and that's what matters. It's bad. Very, very bad. Believe me. Orders? Asked Haines. He was a big man, big enough to ask instructions from anyone who knew more than he did, big enough to make no bones of such asking. One does not give orders to the port admiral, Kinnison mimicked him lightly, but meaningly. One may request, perhaps, or suggest, but... Skip it. I'll take a club to you yet, you young hellion. You said you'd take orders from me. QX, I'll take 'em from you. What are they? No orders yet, I don't think, Kinnison ruminated. No, not until after we investigate. I'll have to have Warsaw and Van Buskirk. We're the only three who have had experience. We'll take the Dauntless, I think. It'll be safe enough. Thought screens will stop the overlords cold. And a scrambler will take care of the invisibility business if they use the same principle we do, and they probably do. Safe enough, then, you think, to let traffic resume if they're protected with screens? I wouldn't say so. They've got Boskonian super dreadnoughts now to use if they want, and that's something else to think about. Another week or so won't hurt much. Better wait until we see what we can see. I've been wrong once or twice before, too, and I may be again. He was. Although his words were conservative enough, he was practically certain in his own mind that he knew all the answers. But how wrong he was, how terribly, how tragically wrong, for even his mentality had not yet envisaged the incredible actuality. His deductions and perceptions fell far, far short of the appalling truth. End of chapter 13.